time talking about Freedom of Information Act, meeting procedure and those kinds of things. This is something we've been talking about, Chairman Philhauer and I have been talking about for quite a while, to try and get scheduled, just as a way of providing this information to our boards and commissions. Some of you are new, some of you have been doing this for a while. Figure it's a great opportunity to kind of remind everybody of the things that we need to know. So Tom Hennick from FOIA will start off, I think, and talk a little bit about freedom of information, and then Rich Corella, the town attorney, will talk about meeting procedure and a variety of other things more town specific. If I could, let's just take a minute and have everybody, this is the old, tell me who you are and what board or commission you're on, or if you're just a member of the public who's interested. So if I could start here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Trish Calderon with the Commission on Aging member.
Trish, thank you.
Jim Senate, planning and zoning.
Jim, well. Okay, that was Trish from the Commission on Aging. This is Jim Senate from Plan Commission, Planning and Zoning. Matthew.
I'm Matt Wright. I'm on the Hampton Economic Development Commission.
George.
George Pfeifferbach, ZBA.
Matty Walton, planning and zoning.
Mike Kowalczyk, planning and zoning. Ryan Baldessario, Brownfield Redevelopment Agency.
Alana Cashel, Board of Finance.
Mark Philhauer, town council.
Allison Walk, Town Council.
Brendan Goff, Town Council.
Russ Chapman, Clean Energy Commission, Task Force. Steve Kellogg, Library Director.
Jesse Alford, Library Advisory Board.
Chuck Roberts, Middle Highland Historic District.
Done a good speech, Chairperson, Mr. Hudson.
Sure, or you could say that you're the executive director of the Housing Authority.
That's often, Housing Authority.
Eric Gibson, vice chair of the housing authority.
Brad Saliza, ZBA.
Ian McLaughlin, Observer.
Scott Clayton, public utilities administrator.
That's Kathy Soroy. She makes everything happen in town. Administrative assistant upstairs. Gentlemen, I leave it to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
we flipped the coin. No, we didn't. I'll go first. I'm Tom Hennick from the FOI Commission. Thank you for the invitation. We love doing these sessions. We do them, I do about 100 of them a year over the course of the year. Pandemic's been a little different. Some of them have been on camera. I don't know about you guys, but I'm so much happier doing them in person. When I do them on the camera, people then turn off their cameras, and I'm talking to myself for now. So I do enough of that. I don't need to do that while I'm working. So just so you know a little bit about me, I'm not an attorney. So none of this is legal advice. None of this is an order or a command from the FOI Commission. I'm in my 21st year doing this. So it's based on what I've seen, based on what I know, based on conversations with the commissioners, with our attorneys. If I don't know an answer, I'm not afraid to say I don't know. I'd ask you to get back with me, check back with me, and I'll get one for you. Again, even that, though, is not an order of command. I spend most of my time answering questions on the phone, answering emails from folks. Some of you have taken advantage of that. I know I recognize some of the names. And again, that's just advice. Just you'll call with a question. We'll say, this is what I think the commission would tell you to do. And you can say, okay, fine, we'll do something else. But that's at least you have some basis upon which to make a decision. I should also share with you that I've been where you are in my town. I've been an active member of several boards. I was on one board for 10 years. I chaired it for 5. As a member of our Board of Selectmen for a couple of years, filling out an unexpired term. The gentleman moved out of town, and recently they roped me back in to be on another board. You just can't get enough, right? Be careful what you when you volunteer. You never know what's going to happen. So a lot of times when I do these sessions, especially the ones in the evening, people say, Tom, you don't get it. We're volunteers. We didn't sign up for this. And I do get it. I really do get it, because when you signed up to run for office or when you were appointed to an office, you didn't necessarily think in terms of parliamentary procedure, ethics, freedom of information. But guess what? It comes with the territory. It's something that we all have to be aware of and have some knowledge of if we're going to be on a board or be active members in our community. And freedom of information is not just some really cool idea. It's the law in the state of Connecticut. It was came into being 47 years ago. If you do the math, 47 years ago puts us right smack in the middle of Watergate. Had a country that was in turmoil, a country that was beside itself with problems, many of which were caused by secrecy. Things being done behind closed doors clandestinely, so that the people didn't know what's going on. Democracy only works if people know what's going on. This is a quote that I love. James Madison, back in the 1700s, a popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. The people who mean to be their own governor must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. Democracy only works if people know what's going on. So when Watergate exploded, Ella Grasso was in Congress. She was watching all this going on around her. And she was contemplating this run for governor back in, 73, 74 in there. And she said, if I run and win, one of the first things we need to do is create some sort of a law in Connecticut so that what I'm seeing here in the capital, in our nation's capital, doesn't happen in Connecticut. So she ran, she won, and one of the first things she did was put forward a concept for this open government law. And she felt it was very important. And she said, this law is critical to making sure that our democracy thrives in Connecticut. In fact, I think it is so important that I will see to it that this law is passed unanimously by our legislature. Have you ever seen the legislature work? Can you imagine guaranteeing a unanimous vote on this law or on anything? Well, she guaranteed it, and I'm here to tell you, she got it. I've actually seen a video of the vote. There wasn't a single no vote in the House, not a single no vote in the Senate. This law passed unanimously. Now, I bring that up just, it's interesting, and it shows you how important it was then, how important it remains today. But it brings us back to why we're here tonight. We're here tonight because to get to the point where everybody voted yes, I want you to think about that for a second on the boards that you're on. Getting everybody to vote yes on something that's probably a little controversial took a lot of arm twisting, a lot of conversation, a lot of negotiation. So you've got a law that's based on this simple, easy concept: access to our public government, access to our public entities. But when you read it, how many of you have tried to read it, try to look at it, try to figure it out, and stuck with a situation? Your eyes roll immediately to the back of your head. It's like, well, wait a minute, your intuition takes you this way, but the law seems to take you that way. So what does that mean? That means that those of us who are on the front lines, we really kind of have to be able to interpret it, sometimes on the fly. Gee, should we be going into executive session? Is this a record we're going to give out? I got somebody standing here who wants to see it. Those are the kinds of decisions we have to make. So you need the tools to work with to make those decisions. And that's what we're here to do. Rich, myself, and thanks to David and the town hall for setting us up, to give us the opportunity to give you some of those tools to work with, so that if you have an issue that deals with freedom of information, you'll be better equipped to handle it. And that's important because not only you don't want to break the law, but if people think that you have broken the law or basically denied them the access that this law gives them, they can file a complaint against you with the Freedom of Information Commission. That's what the law created, the FOI Commission, which is where I work. So if people believe they've been denied the access, they can file a complaint against any public agency. And you just don't want to be in a position of having to defend yourself, and having to, make extra time to go to a hearing in front of the FOI Commission. You want to do it the right way, so that you're out of the firing line when it comes to that. Now, I should say that because this law is so interpretive in some spots, you may make the absolute right decision, be absolutely positive that you've made the right decision, and someone could file a complaint anyway because they disagree with your interpretation. Doesn't mean that you're evil or that you've done something wrong or that you're against open government. It means that somebody disagrees with your interpretation. But if you use the tools, use the things that you've learned, and made the right call, even if it has to go to a hearing, the complaint will be dismissed and you move forward. It'll be clear that you're not against access, that you're not against making sure people have their rights, that you're aware of the importance of open government, and you move forward that way. I use the word access. The law is about two basic things: access to public meetings and access to public records. Now, most of you are board and commission members, and I'm going to have a heavy emphasis on the meetings provisions. You may have questions about records. Feel free to ask them afterwards or call me up and I'll be happy to chat with you about them. But access to meetings, so why isn't it called freedom of access then? Because freedom of information, I think, sounds better. It's not really about free information, though. I don't know how many of you have, I bet you Kathy has had this happen, David too, probably. People come in your office or come to your meeting and say, I want to know. Under freedom of information, I have a right to know. You need to tell me. I have a right to that information. Yes? Yes, right? we're public servants. We're going to answer those questions. But the law technically doesn't require you to answer questions. It's about access to meetings and access to records. So sometimes when people, say, I went to this office and they wouldn't answer the questions and I'm very upset. I have to explain to them. I said, that's not our law. You get to watch people in action at meetings or get the records where the information is contained, but it's not, the sort of thing where we're obligated to answer those questions. We do, of course, to the extent that we're able. I just thought I'd share with you, you think about working at the Freedom of Information Commission. You wouldn't believe some of the questions that I get. People think that we're the information center for the entire state of Connecticut. People call me up and ask me for directions. I got a call one time, absolute true story. How do I get tickets to tonight's UConn basketball game at the Civic Center? True story. I'm not a ticket broker. No, we don't do that.
I'm
Or
not sure I have a
emails.
record responsive to your request.
Right. And then when they ask for records, they think that we sit in this giant vault surrounded by every record held by every agency in the state of Connecticut. They call us and ask them to send them records. I wrote some of them down a couple of weeks ago. West Haven attorney calls up and says, please send me the body cam footage from his client's motor vehicle accident in Bridgeport. No, I don't have a storage of body cam. You got to call them. We got to guide people. So you may have some of that happen to you. Remember, it's the reach is long, but it's not about what some people think it is. Meetings and records. And again, you folks are mostly interested in the meetings provisions. Definition of a meeting in the Freedom of Information Act. Meeting means any hearing or other proceeding of a public agency, any convening or assembly of a quorum of a multi-member public agency, and any communication prior to a quorum of a multi-member public agency, whether in person or by means of electronic equipment, to discuss or act upon a matter over which the public agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Here's my strongest advice. If you're gathering with a quorum of your group to do your work that you've been elected or appointed to do, consider it a meeting. Make sure it's properly noticed, make sure it's open to the public, and make sure there are minutes of that meeting when the meeting is done. Tom, I've got a problem. What's the problem? We've got some really sensitive stuff we're going to talk about tonight. Is it okay if we go off into a side room before the meeting starts so that we can sort of get things hashed out before we go to the meeting? No. I understand that that's how you do it in the private sector, but public sector says no. Well, how about if we form a little subcommittee? Subcommittee is not the full board. We have a 10-member board, we'll form a 4-member subcommittee. It's not a quorum, so they don't need to pay attention to freedom of information. Also false. This law applies to all public agencies in the state of Connecticut. I won't read you that definition, it's long, but in that definition is the phrase that says including any committee of or created by any such office, et cetera, et cetera. So the public agency umbrella is big, covers a lot of agencies, and it also covers subcommittees. So when your subcommittees, when you form them, remember that they need to follow freedom of information as well. Law gives us 3 different kinds of meetings to work with. Gives us a regular meeting, a special meeting, and an emergency meeting. Regular meeting is a meeting that you have per a schedule that you submit to town hall, the town clerk at the end of January of every year that says we meet on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday, the 2nd and 4th Wednesday, 7 o'clock, this beautiful town hall, 8 o'clock library, 7 o'clock elementary school, whatever that is, that becomes your regular meeting time. Special meeting is a meeting that you have that doesn't fall at the regular time. Now, a lot of people see that word special and they go, ooh, we can't do anything. Well, you can do anything you want to do in a special meeting. Here's the difference between the two. For both of them, you have to have an agenda. The agenda needs to be prepared and available at least 24 hours in advance. Anybody here responsible for agenda preparation? Okay, so you put those agendas together. Specificity is important. The law really wants us to make it so that when the public sees that, the words that the court uses to fairly apprise the public as to what's going to happen. So you prepare the agenda is available 24 hours in advance. You submit it to the clerk's office. You have one in your office if your office has one. If it's a special meeting, it also is required to be on your website. But here's the difference. The regular meeting, should something arise that's not on the agenda, you could add something to that agenda. Special meeting, you can't. So items like other business, old business, new business. I don't know about you guys who do agendas. I cut and paste when I do mine, and other business is there. Boom, you plop it on there. That's not the best agenda item when you really think about it. But at a regular meeting, it'll pass because you can say, Chairman says, is there any other business? Yes, Madam Chairman, I'd like to add this to the item. You make a motion, someone seconds it, boom, you can add it to the agenda. But at a special meeting, you can't add anything. So a special meeting agenda that has other business with nothing articulated underneath it, you might as well take it off. It doesn't do you any good. So it's got to be specific, and you can't add anything once that 24-hour window closes. That's the primary difference between the two. A lot of times people will call and say, gee, it's a special meeting. We can't do this. We can't do, you can do anything you want to do as long as it's on that agenda. That's the key. The third kind of meeting, the emergency meeting. We don't have a long session involved here. I have a couple of humorous or not so humorous to them stories about people who got burned by that. Emergency meeting, you have to remember, you want to try to avoid. My advice is always to try to avoid the emergency meeting. Emergency meeting is not noticed. And the law really tries to push us towards making sure we do our work in public. The problem with the emergency meeting is that what you and I think might rise to the level of emergency probably doesn't rise to that level in the eyes of the law. It sets the bar really, really high. My favorite sort of anecdote about that is we have some holidays in Connecticut. Some towns close, some towns don't. I think of Veterans Day, I think of Columbus Day. There are others out there. And inevitably, after one of those, I'll get a call and it'll go like this: Tom, I've got a problem. What's the problem? Our meeting is tonight. A regular meeting is tonight. And I always bring the agenda in at least 24 hours in advance. I forgot town hall was closed yesterday. So I brought it in this morning. Is that okay? No, it's not okay. You need 24 hours. I'm sorry, that's the law. Well, we have too much to do, so I'm calling tonight an emergency meeting. Folks, oops, I forgot, it's not an emergency. In our non-legal brains, those of us, who aren't trained like Rich is, it might feel like an emergency, but the law says no. My strongest advice is, if you have any doubt about it, wait, postpone it, go 24 hours out, make it a special meeting if you have to. Getting caught, I've seen a couple of boards in towns get so messed up. There was one shorter story. It involved a board of education that approved an increase for the superintendent of schools at an emergency meeting. And people said, no, there was no emergency there. What was the emergency? And they challenged it. They filed a complaint with the FOI commission. Now, when a complaint's filed, we try to mediate. We try to bring the parties together so that you don't have to go to one of those hearings. But so I called the chairman of the board. I said, well, it's simple. You might have made a mistake. Probably wasn't an emergency. Notice the meeting and do it again. There was silence on the other end of the phone. The makeup of the board had changed. He couldn't have gotten the votes to approve the race that was already in place. So he had to sort of go forward. People say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is the commission has the ability to do a couple of things. It can issue civil penalties against the offenders of anywhere from $20 to $1,000, but it can also declare null and void something that happens at an illegal meeting. So that Board of Education was sitting on pins and needles until the commission ruled. It ruled that it was a violation. There was no emergency, but it declined to declare null and void because it looked like it had been an honest mistake. So, you want to be smart about it. You want to think, okay, we're not going to do that unless we have a true emergency. True emergency, people say, well, what is that? I always say keeping people safe, keeping people out of harm's way is the real bar. You have an emergency because you can't wait 24 hours, something horrific might happen. If you ever have an emergency situation, you have your meeting, you discuss only that emergency issue, and within 72 hours, you create minutes that reflect what the emergency was, who was there, and what you did about it. But again, if you could avoid that because it's unnoticed. Now, by the way, I know East Hampton's not a political town. Right, but what's the first thing that happens if you have a meeting that's not noticed? What are they hiding? What are they doing? This has nothing to do with FOI, but it creates problems that you don't need. It's just an issue that if you can avoid it at all costs, I would. I mentioned that your meetings are open to the public. Anybody can come. You're from Portland. What are you doing here? Anybody can come. Anybody can audio or videotape a meeting. I'll get back to that in a second. Something that the FOI Act does not do is give people the right to speak at a public meeting. It's not guaranteed under the FOI Act, and a lot of people think that it is. Now, most of our boards, I know mine did, have public comment. But remember, board guys, that you can shape, frame the public participation portion of your meeting any way you like. We're gonna limit everybody to 3 minutes. We've got a lot of work to do tonight. We're not gonna talk about this topic. We beat it to death the last 3 meetings. We're not gonna talk about it. And if you want to do that, you have a right to do that. You have a right to control it. You have a right to make sure that public comment is, if you want it, it's fine. But if it doesn't, so disrupt and so control your meeting that you can't get your work done. It's time for me to sort of veer off into the brave new world, if you will. When the pandemic hit, the governor issued his executive orders allowing us to meet virtually. I already gave away, my preferences to do it in person, but the reality is that a lot of boards are still using that. In 21, the legislature, the governor's orders went away. The legislature put some pieces in place. And this year they sort of tweaked it just a little bit. The main thing was that this law, the ability to meet virtually was going to go away in April of this year. And the legislature said, no, we want it to continue. So now we have the ability to meet either in person, totally virtually, or what they call a hybrid meeting. Some board members there, or all board members there, but the public's involved as well. Couple things to remember about that. If you want to go down that road, regular meetings, if you're going to meet with a piece of it being electronic or all of it being electronic, that 24-hour notice that I told you about, now you add on a 48-hour notice. It's still 24 hours for the agenda. I'm not quite sure why they went this way, but the agenda is 24 hours. You have to get the word out 48 hours in advance. This regular meeting will have a component that's electronic. It'll either be all virtual or a hybrid. And you have to do that on your website. You have to do that to all board members to let them know what's going on, so that they have, sort of the knowledge as to how to do it. The website, when you put that notice up, that agenda up in 24 hours after that, although a lot of people, when they're meeting virtually, just put it up before 48 hours, which is really probably an easier way to do it. You have to have the link, be it Zoom or WebEx or Teams, whatever you're using. The link to the meeting has to be on there so that people can click in and join your meeting. You also, if it's a regular meeting, you also have to record the meeting. You can record it or transcribe it. You have to record it, and the recording has to be on the website within 7 days of the meeting, and it has to stay up there for 45 days. Now, interestingly enough, again, don't shoot the messenger. That only applies to regular meetings. Special meetings, for whatever reason, don't need to be recorded, although many towns have decided to go ahead and record them as well, which is fine. The more access, the better. But if you don't, you're not violating anything in the FOIA. There's another little twist. If the meeting is totally electronic, and I haven't, fortunately, I don't know if you've heard any, people call up and if they come at you in writing 24 hours in advance, say my computer's broken, or I don't have internet access, and you're having that meeting virtually, you have to find a place for them to watch the meeting, believe it or not. They put that in the law. I don't know why. Again, don't shoot the messenger, but I haven't had one case of that since this has been in effect for almost 2 years, one way or another. So I would argue that that's a good thing. I bring the electronic meeting stuff up when I talk about public comment, because one of the things that's happened with public comment is that people have sort of taken that as a license to be a little bolder and a little more engaged. Has East Hampton had any problems with Zoom bombing? If I say Zoom bombing, you know what I'm talking about? Let me know what it is. You've had a couple of issues like that. Just because it's virtual and people can link in, click in, more easily, they don't have to come to a meeting place, doesn't give them the right to disrupt your meeting. You have a right to run an orderly meeting. So, well, I'm on the link and I'm going to talk, blah, blah, blah. If they're disrupted, you can mute them and kick them out. I mean, you don't have an obligation to let people talk just because they're virtual. If you were here in the council chambers and they were being disrupted, the law says that you could actually have them thrown out. So I want you to sort of think of the same things. If you ever have that problem, I hope you don't, but if you ever run into a situation like that, you have the ability to control the meeting. I'll tell you I've been Zoom bombed once. I was doing a presentation for a civic group. We'll call it a civic group. It's like Legal Women Voters. And it was in I should have mentioned, my oldest daughter is an international teacher. So the computer room is up here and she's downstairs in our dining room, and she's teaching her first graders who are in Panama. So imagine that, Durham to Panama. She's teaching the first graders and I'm upstairs, and all of a sudden screen, I start hearing this loud reggae sort of dance music, you know, la, 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 la. And I was thinking it must be the first graders downstairs. And then she yells upstairs, this, Dad, what's that music? I'm thinking, uh-oh. And just as she says that, I wheel around and the screen goes black and the strippers parade across while I'm talking about freedom of information. The organizers were a little flummoxed. I could see the hands running around. They finally got them up. Let's just put it this way, they left very little to the imagination. But they didn't have to put up with that. You don't have to put up with it. You know, that's a funny Zoom bomb, but some of them were pretty serious. You know, people were yelling racial epithets, insulting board members. I dealt with a case out of Bristol a couple months ago where pornography interrupted their P&Z meeting. For those of you who are on P&Z, can you imagine you're looking at a site plan, all of a sudden the porno pops up on the screen? They were incensed. They actually went after them. And this is the weird thing, and most of the evidence points to this. This was some teenager in Maryland that they found where it was coming. So it's not your neighbors and friends necessarily. It's people who are just out to have a good time. You know, they have nothing better to do. But the bottom line, what I'm trying to tell you is you don't have to put up with that. You can turn it off, you can stop it, you can boot them out, mute them, whatever, you know, you have at your disposal. So we're talking about making sure that the meetings are open to the public, open, accessible. There's a couple ways that boards can exclude the public. One is called going into executive session. Have you all heard the term, or at least somewhat familiar with it? Remember that an executive session is a portion of a publicly noticed open meeting. It's not something that sits on an island by itself. So even if the only item you have on a given evening is an executive session item, you still need to notice the meeting. You need to convene in public. Someone needs to make a motion to go into that executive session. And then you go in. You need a 2/3 vote to go in. You have the discussion. In executive session, folks, please only discuss. You can talk as long as you want, but only discuss. You must come out of the executive session to take any action if you're going to. The minutes must reflect what the executive session was for, who went in, what the topic was, and then if there's any action, they need to reflect what the action was, specifically who voted for what or for whom. 5 reasons. Personnel matter, pending claims or pending litigation, a security matter, a land transaction. I suspect that some board was involved buying the land for this beautiful building. So they could have probably negotiating back and forth, unless it was town. We'll say that somebody, so the conversations were going on. You could have those negotiations behind closed doors. The town wouldn't have to reveal its position by negotiating something like that in a public setting. The last one is a little broader. It allows for a conversation about a document or documents that are exempt from disclosure. You are a board that puts a project out to bid. There's an exemption in the FOIA Act that says you're allowed to withhold the contents of bids and RFPs until you've actually signed a contract. So you put your project out to bid, the 5 bid packages come in, you want to look at them as a board, you want to review them as a board. Because the documents are exempt, you can do that in executive session. You go into executive session to talk about the content of those documents, which are exempt from disclosure. I want to back up to the personnel executive session. If you have an issue like that, first of all, the agenda needs to say more than executive session personnel. The motion needs to say more than executive session personnel. You don't necessarily have to name the individual, but the courts have come down really hard on that. Executive session plan, discussion of the performance of a public works employee, of a police officer, of a teacher, but you need more than just personnel. And then the law says you need to give that person notice before the executive session. And the person has the right to come forward and say, no executive session. I want that discussion to be held in public. And if the person demands a public airing, if you will, then the law says you have to give it to him or her. But once they waive that, whether or not you bring them into the executive session with you is entirely up to you. Many people believe they have a right to enter the executive session if they're the topic. They don't. The only people who have a right to the executive session are members of the actual board. If they want to invite people in, they can. You can invite in anybody you want to give evidence, to give testimony, to hear somebody's side of the story. But it's not anything that is required. Executive session for pending claims and pending litigation is what it sounds like. You've got a lawsuit against you, an FOI complaint. you're contemplating legal action against another entity, you can do that. And the last one, executive session for security. You know, folks, that's one that never used to come up very much. But it's starting since Sandy Hook in 2012, the number of those has gone up and up and up. A lot of them boards of education talking about extra security for their buildings, resource officers, but then it rolls over to a police commission and a board of finance and even a board of selectmen, funding, ideas, concepts, things like that. So that would be the fifth one. Again, remember, never ever vote behind closed doors. I told you there were a couple ways that the two different paths that boards can take. The other one, there's a number of things that the legislature did that says, you know, we think that you will think of these as meetings, but for the purposes of FOI, they're not. You know, again, this makes me bang my head against the wall when I try to explain it, but what they basically said was, if you are in this kind of a gathering, even though you're doing official work and all that, it doesn't need to be noticed, it's not open, there are no minutes. Executive level search committees. The police chief retires, the police commission wants to look for a new chief, you can form an executive level search committee to look for a new chief. Collective bargaining, all your collective bargaining sessions, not covered by freedom of information. And one that I always stress with board and commission members, chance gatherings or social meetings. You love each other, you're gonna go out to dinner, go to, is it Rosini's down the street there? Go to Rosini's for a nice dinner. You're not supposed to talk about official business. What else are you gonna talk about? Right? I mean, geez, how would they? All right, so here's my plea. Look, let's be realistic. Let's not be naive. Those conversations are going to take place. What you want to think of at dinner, in the parking lot, do not discuss important, deep, deliberative, all those things. Those deep deliberative conversations must take place here. I'm supposed to tell you not to have them at all. That's not realistic. But what you want to do is be really careful the extent to which you have those conversations outside of the meeting room, because you're asking for trouble. I guarantee you that one time you're at Rosini's and you get in a hot debate over the issue you just talked about at the meeting, the wrong person sitting in the next booth and files a complaint that you just had an illegal meeting over pizza. You don't want to do it. Be really smart the extent to which you talk to each other outside of the meeting. And to that end, remember that whether in person or by means of electronic equipment, that means the telephone, but the record of emails. You start emailing each other or texting each other. Remember that those become public records. We're not going to get into public records tonight, but those are records. If someone says, I want to see any and all emails between the P&Z members about that topic, you'd have to produce them. And then, oh, what do you know? They were discussing this. Oh, what do you know? They had a meeting via email that they shouldn't have had. Be really smart about that. I don't want to take any more of the time. Rich has good stuff to tell you, but let me one other thing about meetings, minutes. Anybody here responsible for minutes? Minutes need not be the recreation of War and Peace. They are not meant to be every word. Library guys, you got that? Yeah, you got that. They need not be they need not people, but they go on and on and on and on and on. No, technically, the only requirement for minutes is a record of who votes for what or for whom. Now you're going to put more than that in there, but you'll have people, especially in the virtual world. I'm sending you this speech and I want you to attach it to me. Not required. Crisp, clear, concise recapitulation of what happened is the way you should do it. Make sure they're available in 7 days. And then everybody's happy. Now, again, I'm going to yield to Rich here, but there's a whole second half of the conversation about public records. The one thing I just want to share with you is, remember that anytime you create anything in the conduct of East Hampton business, it becomes by definition a public record. There are multiple exemptions, exceptions. You may not ever have to release any of them, but you're typing away at home and you say, oh, geez, this is a funny story. I think I'm going to, share. But and you wrap it into a conversation with a board member about what you want on the agenda, and someone wants to see it because you might be insulted by what you wrote. If you don't want to see it on the front page of the Current, don't send it. Okay, because it's a public record that could find its way into the public arena. So with that, I've gone a little bit over. I apologize for that.
I got a couple of follow-ups
Yes.
that might be helpful. So you talked about emails and texts between board members. I've seen a bad habit in other towns where during the meeting, commission members or people in the public will be texting people on the commission. That's all open to discovery,
That too, right?
right?
We've had cases on that.
Yep.
You basically be having a meeting within a meeting. Guys, the best, safest thing to do is put the damn phones down.
Yeah.
Put the phones down during the meeting. That's the best way to do it.
And then on executive sessions, I've always felt the best practice is on the agenda, have the executive session noticed, specificity as to the reasons why you're going in.
Right.
Is it common to list who's invited to attend on the agenda?
The
Or is that
agenda-
something that you can do at the meeting?
I would do it at the meeting. I would put it in the minutes.
Okay.
I'd make sure it was in the minutes, yes.
And those people invited to attend, they have to be necessary for the discussion. Is that right?
You can't just create a second audience by bringing people in. You bring them in to hear their side of the story, to get testimony, evidence from them, things like that.
And then last thing, and I know you didn't talk about records a lot, but it's access to records. People don't have to create documents or answer questions. I
Right.
think you kind of started with this. If people have questions about facts or, you're not required to research or compile a document that doesn't exist.
You don't need to create something. A lot of times people will come to a public office and say, I want a list of that. Or I want a report of this. If it doesn't exist, FOI is not in play. You're not required to create something you don't have. You bet.
I'll tag in. So Tom had all the fun stuff. He stole all the thunder here. The last time we did this with Tom and I was, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago. And at the time, I gave you one of these at the time. I've updated it a little bit based on a conversation with Dave today. A couple of things have changed. So, but primarily, Tom gave you the law about what's required in terms of open meetings. This is going to be more about how to conduct those meetings and the process while you're up here on the dais or conducting a meeting, how to handle motions, how to handle the agenda, how to handle the public, and how to basically run the meeting in a way that really protects the rights of the minority in the audience, the people that maybe have a minority view of it, but at the end of the day, the majority rule on all matters is what really prevails. So that's what Robert's Rules of Order are designed to do, and that's what the process is designed to do. And that's what parliamentary procedure is really all about. So kind of starting at the beginning. I think you all know this, but town of East Hampton is a town council, town manager form of government. It's different than a board of selectmen or a mayor and council type of government. That's been established by your charter. The charter is the organic rule of law for the town. It's the basis of what allows the town to operate as a municipality. And the charter vests the legislative authority in the town council, except for a few items. I list them there on page 2. Approving budgets every year. You can go to a town meeting to approve the budget. I know in the past, we've actually had a couple of issues on that. Your charter actually requires the town meeting to send the budgets to referendum. So you don't vote at the town meeting on the budget. You don't vote up or down. It automatically, by your charter, has to go to referendum. So you can talk about it, you can debate it, but at the end of the day, the budget goes to the referendum. Approving bonds and notes and other additional appropriations. The purchase or sale of real estate after the approval by the Board of Finance is something that's reserved to the town meeting. Note that it's not the acceptance of gifts or donations of land. We've had a couple of those where somebody's donated a piece of land to the town. That doesn't need to be approved by the town meeting. That's something that the town council can do. If the town wants to overrule something that the town council has enacted, it has 20 days to do so, and 10% of the voters can petition to send something to a special town meeting to act on it. The town meeting, the public has the right to also enact ordinances, the power of petition by getting 10% of the voters to file a petition saying they want to see a particular ordinance enacted. And any item that comes in front of the town meeting for a vote can be put to a ballot by the lesser of 200 or 10% of the voters. I think in that case, you're probably 200 people. would be the number. Only the town council has the ability, and the town meeting in certain circumstances, like we just described, has the ability to enact an ordinance or a law. Except the planning and zoning commission, you guys have the right to enact your own regulations. So, and your own ordinances. So that's something that the state law provides. So the way each of these, or each of your commissions act is by bylaws, and if you don't have bylaws, it's by Robert's Rules of Order. The town charter allows the town council to establish its own rules. And up until November of last year, the town council had its own set of rules and how its procedures were. I think last year, Dave informed me that they adopted Robert's Rules of Order. So thank you for that. That makes life a lot easier. There's a baseline to go at when there's any questions. I think the Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Ed also have established their own bylaws as well, but they've also adopted Robert's Rules of Order. Let's talk a little bit about quorum. A quorum is the minimum number of members of a board necessary to conduct business. And so it's usually a majority. So, you know, if we have 10 members, a majority would be 6, right? It's more than 50%. If you have, 15 members, that'd be 7.5, but you don't have a half a person, so you go to 8, right? So majority of the people on a commission. When you don't have a quorum present at a meeting, you can't act on anything. You can discuss things, right? You can talk about what's before the commission, but you can't take any action. And any action that you do take, if you vote on anything, it's illegal. Couple of interesting notes. Per your town charter, the town council quorum is 4, right? There's 7 members on the town council, 4 is a quorum. But also by your town charter, anything that gets enacted by the town council requires 4 votes. So if you have a minimum of a quorum, you can act with 4, but all 4 of you have to act the same way in order to get anything established or any vote passed. Okay. The agenda, Tom talked about the agenda and posting the agenda. The town council has an agenda kind of structured in its bylaws already, which is helpful. But typically the agenda is set by the town manager in consultation with the town council. 6 days ahead of the next council meeting, they get together and they put an agenda together. And 2 members of the town council are necessary to put something on the agenda. And then the agenda outline is listed there. That's from the town council's bylaws. Other agendas, each of your commissions can set up your agenda really any way you want it. You heard Tom say, you guys have the right to manage the operations of your commission or board how you see fit in accordance with the law. And you want to have time for public comment, you want to have time for old business, you want to have time for planning sessions or bring in a presentation. That's your prerogative. You run the commission or the board how you see fit. Tom talked about new business and a kind of amending the agenda. Again, you can only amend the agenda for regularly scheduled meetings. A special meeting, you're stuck with what you put on the agenda for the special meeting. You can't amend that. The town council used to have a 2-reading rule where a new matter would come up for discussion, and it would come up at the first meeting, and then you'd have to have it come up at a second meeting to have further discussion about it before you could act on it. I think you've changed that so that you can now act on things the first time around. But it allows, again, with 2 council members, you can move things to a second hearing if you think it's important enough to have the public have more comment on it, or you want to have more discussion or input on it. It allows you to do that. Again, minutes of the meeting, Tom touched on about the timing of when they need to be posted. And that, again, doesn't have to be War and Peace. It really just should reflect what was done, not necessarily what was said. I've seen minutes, verbatim, Mark said this, Dave said that. You don't need that. You just need to say what occurred. And then really the most important part about the minutes, though, is getting them out in time, because that does become a big issue. So that's a little bit of a background. The bulk of my discussion tonight will be basically about Robert's Rules of Order and kind of managing the process of those meetings. little bit of background, like I gave you here about the kind of the history of Robert's Rules of Order, this goes back to 1876. So this is, and it's really established on English parliamentary law. It's just time over time over time, how things have worked best. And most, I think most states and most nations follow this now. Even the United Nations follows Robert's Rules of Order and the deliberation and how they operate. So it's an important procedural guide to know, especially if you're chairing a particular commission. You should know at least the basics of it. You should get a copy of this if you don't have one already. And if you don't have that, at least, take a little cheat sheet that I've given you here and hopefully use this to help you out. Robert's Rules is designed to keep business moving, right? And like I said earlier, it protects the rights of the public and if they have the right to have input. It also protects the rights of the people in the commission who might have a minority view. Everybody has the right to speak on matters, and you want to keep this moving along, keep business moving along, and do it in a polite and organized fashion. So that everybody has, the decisions are fairly made and everybody has some input into it. Basic rules. Only one subject can be debated or discussed at a time, right? Matter comes up. We want to talk about, buying a new school bus. Okay, we're going to talk about the school bus. We're not going to talk about, the FOIA contract. And we're not going to talk about other things. We're going to talk about the school bus, what's it cost, who we're going to buy it from, and we're going to put that issue to bed before moving on to the next matter. Generally, you want to have motions or debate made in an affirmative vote. So you don't want to have a negative motion. We're going to say, I vote that we don't buy the school bus. Okay, now it gets confusing. I agree with you. No, did you agree to vote to buy it or not buy it? I vote no to not buy the school bus. So that's a double negative. So did you want to buy it? And it goes around and around like that. Oh, if you're a chairman or if you're a person making a motion at a commission meeting, vote, make your motion in the affirmative. I vote to buy the school bus. Then people can say yes or no to that, and it's very clear what their intentions are, what you proposed, and what the outcome's going to be. Only one person may speak at any given time. Typically, the person speaking goes through the chairperson. Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion, and then you're allowed to speak about it. Then somebody else is recognized by the chairman. Okay, I want to talk in opposition to that, and somebody else wants to talk in favor about it, or however it goes. But it's always through the chairman. The chairman controls the flow of who's speaking and at what time. And usually the person moving the motion, speaks first, and then opportunities for other people to counter and have their positions heard as well, but only one person at a time. All members have equal rights to speak. Every single member on the commission, whether they're an alternate member being seated that evening, they have the right to speak, and that's pretty much it. They have the right to speak. Each item presented should be entitled to full and free debate. Everybody's entitled to speak on a matter at least once, and really just by practice, no more than twice. If you get into continuing to beat the dead horse, we've gone over this time and time again, the chairman's really got to take control of the meeting and say, okay, that's it. We're done discussing this, or somebody can move to call the question and let's end debate, and we'll go on to the decision. As Tom was saying earlier, you can control the flow of this as the chairman. We'll say, all right, everybody's got 3 minutes on this topic. We got a lot to go through. So we're not going to spend all night talking about this particular issue. 3 minutes each, and that's it. But you can do it longer. General rule is everybody's entitled to speak about 10 minutes each on a topic, and you can only speak twice. But if you got a 7-member commission and everybody takes 20 minutes, you're there for an hour, 2 hours, right? So, don't go to the 10 minutes. Bottom line, rights of the minority must be protected, but the will of the majority is what prevails. And that's ultimately, you get a vote of the commission. You got a 7-member commission. The vote is 4-3, close call, but it passes. That's it. That's majority will prevail. So that's how we work in this country. So that's how that works. A little bit about voting. We talked about quorum before. There's really 3 ways that three types of voting in terms of like how many votes you need. Typically, it's the majority of those present at the meeting. And with hybrid, it's gotten a little bit weird because maybe they're not present, they're on the video or whatever. But if they're participating in the meeting, they're part of your those present for the meeting. Majority of those present is usually what's necessary to pass a motion. Sometimes you need 2/3, right? As Tom was mentioning, some things require 2/3 vote. So if you want to amend the agenda on a regular meeting, it requires 2/3 of those in attendance to pass the changed agenda. And then a majority of the entire membership is really only needed to go back and either change something that you previously already enacted. And sometimes there's statutory reasons for that as well. So you just have to be cognizant of what is required of you at each of these meetings. Normally, it's the majority of those present. Couple of instances where that becomes problematic for those of you on the ZBA, right? There's 5 of you, right? Statute requires a variance to be enacted by 4 votes. You can have a meeting with 4 members only because the quorum, would satisfy a quorum requirement, but all 4 of you have to agree to it. So it kind of has to be unanimous for the applicant if you're going to pass a variance with 4 members in attendance. You could even meet with 3 members, but you can't do anything, right? You can vote on things, but nothing's going to pass. Town council for you guys the same way. 4 of you need to vote in the affirmative to take any action on something. And so even though 4 of you is a quorum, you could have a meeting, but all 4 of you has to agree. Abstentions become problematic in those instances because somebody abstaining to vote, it's essentially it's a refusal to vote. It's not a yay or an nay, it's just a non-vote. And so when you count the votes at the end of the night, and how many did you get? You just don't vote it. You just don't count it. So they're not considered affirmative. So if you need 4 votes and one person abstains, doesn't pass. So it's essentially a no. Again, that happens ZBA quite often because of the 4 vote requirement. I would imagine that the town council might have that same problem too if you were to move forward with discussion where there's only 4 of you present. Really, and I say this on page 6, only abstain if you have a conflict of interest. You clearly have a conflict of interest, in which case, we'll touch on this in a second, but you should recuse yourself from the discussion entirely and not be voting or discussing it, even if you have a conflict. Or if you truly feel that you don't have enough information to make an informed decision, in which case, maybe you could have moved, and maybe you should move to continue the debate to another day and seek more information or table the matter for another time. Don't use abstaining as a way of, I really don't want to be on record as voting no, and I'm just going to not vote, right? Don't do that. You're not doing anybody any favors. Just vote your conscience. You want to vote for it or vote against it, and really only abstain if you have a conflict of interest or you feel like there's not enough information to make an informed decision. Well, real briefly, you do have an ethics ordinance and a code of conduct, which I haven't seen in a while. So I forgot that you had a code of conduct. Code of conduct is really, treat people fairly. That's really what the code of conduct boils down to. The ethics ordinance gets a little bit more into financial conflicts. If you have a financial interest or an interest, one of your family members has an interest in the matter before your body, your commission or your board, you should step aside. And you should declare that at the time of the meeting. If there's a particular agenda item where you feel you have a conflict of interest, you should tell the chairman, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I have a conflict on item 6. I will be recusing myself from the discussion and the vote. And really the best practice is for you to up and leave the room and then come back when the meeting gets back on schedule. You don't want to be seen as influencing the vote, right? You want to be sitting in there in the audience looking at the members, nodding your head, right? You can't do that. you have to just, the best practice is to leave the room. That way, everybody knows that you had no input into the discussion, and certainly don't vote on it. Your code of ethics and your code of conduct are available on your website. And it's a pretty straightforward read. If you have a question about a conflict of interest, ask your chairman, ask Dave, ask me, okay? It's better to be safe than sorry in those types of circumstances. Okay, a little bit about types of motions. And this gets into the weeds of Robert's Rules of Order. I'm going to do this at a high level because I want to save time for questions and answers if you have any, and also get you out on time. There's four categories of motions. One is the main motion. Again, getting back to, I move that we buy the school bus, right? Pretty straightforward. Then there's subsidiary motions to that main motion. Things like a motion to amend that motion or a motion to reconsider that motion. There's privileged motions, which are kind of urgent or special matters, usually to recess, something that to just stop the meeting for a minute, and that takes precedence. And then there's incidental motions, which are points of parliamentary inquiry or a point of order, right? I want to have a question about how we're proceeding. And those actually take precedence. So on page 7, if you go down the 4 categories, the ones that need immediate attention kind of start from the bottom up. If somebody brings up a point of order, then the chairman says, okay, we got to talk about that point of order right now and address it and then move on, right? And it's usually a quick decision. It's not debatable. Point of order is something that the chairman decides yes or no, and then you move on. Amendments and subsidiary motions need to be addressed before the main motion is considered. So I want to buy, we're going to buy the school bus. That's the motion. We're going to move to buy the school bus. Wait a minute, I want an amendment. I think we should buy 2 school buses. I think we have a deal, right? Or something like that. All right. And you debate the amendment. We're going to buy 2, we're going to buy 1, and you debate the amendment. And if everybody agrees on the amendment, then you bring it up to the full body again as the main motion. But those are different types of motions. I detail them more on page 8, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but the ones that you're going to see the most are an amendment, some sort of continuance, right? Either a motion to table the matter, or a motion to continue or postpone this to another date. Motions to reconsider what we just decided or to revisit it in some way, and then finally a motion to call the question. So we just kind of went over a motion, an amendment to a motion. It's used to fine tune, the main motion. You can have several amendments. You can debate several amendments. So you have a first amendment or a second amendment. You can have several that are debated at the same time. But only one may, one may be, you only deal with one of them at a time. You can only debate one amendment at a time. Then you move on. If you have another amendment, that's fine. Keep on voting on whatever amendments until you get, until you get to a consensus as to what you want to ultimately vote on. So that's the amendment. There may be a point where you don't have enough information. All right, we need more information. We want to hear from, you guys at P&Z do this all the time, right? We need to hear from the traffic guy. He's not here, right? We need more information. We need to hear about, from the neighbor or something else. We're going to continue this to the next meeting. That would be like a motion to postpone to a certain date. Tabling the motion is kind of just putting it off to the side. We'll get back to it later. Maybe somebody's not here at 7 o'clock. They're going to be here at 7:30. Okay, we'll table that for now. We'll bring it back to debate later. You can do that. Little caution on some of these things, especially you P&Z guys. You have statutory deadlines. You got to start the public hearing. If you have a public hearing on a matter, you got to start it within 35 days. You got to conduct it over the next 65 days, and then you got to end it, and then you got to decide in 35 days. There's some wiggle room on that if the applicant gives you, an extension. But by and large, if you have statutory deadlines that you have to meet, try not to continue matters down the road too far, because you might run afoul of some of those deadlines that are statutorily provided. Motions to reconsider. I've seen this a couple of times where you have a controversial topic. Debate goes on for a while, and ultimately, all right, we're going to vote on this. And you vote and you deny it. Let's say you deny whatever the topic is. So we're not going to do that. And then a week later, something comes up, you're like, oh, shoot, we should have done that, right? We should have voted yes on that. As long as it's not something that's been, taken and it is irreversible, at the next meeting, you can reconsider what you acted on the first time around. It's a motion to reconsider. Reconsidering something is different than rescinding something. So we'll talk about that difference in a minute, but you can reconsider something. And a motion to reconsider, you need at least one person who was kind of on the winning side, want to have it reconsidered, first of all. So it can't just be the people that were opposing it saying, wait, we got to vote on this again. No. You lost 4-3. Okay, we know it was close, but 3 you can't ask for us to reconsider it again as a group. But if one of the winning side, if somebody voted yes for it, says, okay, we should really reconsider this, right? And then that's okay. Rescinding something is, okay, we're not going to reconsider this, but we're going to just erase what we did before, right? We shouldn't have done that at all. We're not going to reconsider it. We're just going to say, nope, we're going to undo what we did. That requires 2/3 vote to rescind, the motion to rescind. And it's 2/3 of those that were present at the meeting. Just reading my notes. The only problem with that is if it's something that, I go back to P and Z because that's the one I'm most familiar with. That happens a lot where you look to rescind what was just approved. Well, if you've approved an application, you can't go back and rescind it. Once you've approved it, it's been published in the paper. The applicant has relied on your approval. It's going to start construction or whatever they're going to do. You can't go back and rescind it at that point. And then lastly, calling the question, if debate goes on and we're done talking about this, somebody can say, Mr. Chairman, we're gonna move to call the question. Let's end the debate, puts the matter to a vote and ends it. And that's out of order, right? So and then on page 9, I just give you some details about what privileged motions are, motion to recess, motion to adjourn the meeting, and then other incidental motions, kind of some background on those. You won't use Robert's Rules of Order. I think they say you use 20% of what's in Robert's Rules of Order most of the time. There are other 80% of it you're never gonna touch. But it's important to know how it works and how to move the meeting along. When some, as a member of the commission, again, you should speak through the chair. You should ask questions through the chairperson. And when you say something, be very clear. I say, I move to accept or I move to adopt, and state in very clear terms and specifically what it is you're moving. And as chairman, you should say, okay, the motion on the floor is to adopt this motion and state specifically what it is so that everybody knows what we're voting on, and that the public knows what they're voting on as well. And then ask, for a vote. And there's 4 ways that you can take a vote. You can do a voice vote, a verbal vote, and say, so the chairman says, all those in favor say aye, everybody say nay. Silence. Okay, that's easy, right? Everybody voted for it. That's easy. You don't need to do anything else. Sometimes you hear, all those in favor say aye, any opposed, nay. Okay, I can't tell what that vote is, right? So do a roll call. Okay, you go down, usually have a clerk or a secretary of the commission, say, okay, read each member's name, you vote yay or nay. You get a roll call and you get the vote that way. And then, sometimes by what's called by division, you don't necessarily have a roll call, it's a show of hands, essentially. After the yay or nay, you say, okay, I didn't really hear what the answer was there. So if those are you in favor, say, raise your hand. And the chairman goes down and counts. And all those opposed say no, goes down and counts. And the chairman figures it out. there's one way of voting, which I'm not a big fan of, but it's allowed, is, by general consent. And you see that sometimes on what they call a consent agenda, a list of items that, we're not going to read through each of these. It's like, leave it up to the commission to read each of these items and understand what we're voting on here. And then we're gonna vote on the consent agenda on one vote, right? And so the chairman will say, all right, all those items on the consent agenda, absent any objection, they're all approved, right? And so it's by consent. Not the best way of handling things, but on kind of ministerial things like approval of minutes or things like that, it's sometimes helpful to move business along. But I'm not a fan of it because it takes away the ability for people to chime in on even little things like, you spelled my name wrong on the minutes, or, things like that. All right, handling debate and discussion of an item. We talked a little bit about this. Try to limit people's time, whether it's commission members or the public's time, on speaking on a particular topic. You'll be here all evening if you if you don't kind of put some reins on it. And there's no law that says that that the public's entitled to speak about things. But best practice is to say, look, you each got the same amount of time on a particular topic, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you guys decide, but put some limits on it so you're not here for all hours of the night. And then a lot of times you'll see this at public hearings where people talk about the same topic. 100 people in the room. Everybody's going to be in opposition to this project, whatever it is, and they keep coming up one after another. I don't want this, right? It's going to be terrible for the taxes. I don't want this. It's going to ruin my property values. And everybody's going up. And so at some point, a good chairman will say, look, everybody, we get it, right? We know you guys are in opposition, right? If it's not about property taxes or your property values, I'll hear you, but don't come up and keep on repeating the same thing over and over. So you got to just kind of read the room sometimes that way. The order of debate should be managed as well. The proponent of a motion should be the first one to speak, and then allow others to talk in opposition to it. Questions from the public and questions from other commissioners should be addressed to the chairperson. It just keeps it more orderly. This way, individual commission members are not talking particularly with the public about a particular topic or question. If they want to run questions through the chair, it's a lot easier to manage the flow of the debate. Staying germane to the subject. We're talking about this particular topic. I know you want to talk about things, we're talking about buying the school bus. All right, it's budgetary, it's Board of Ed stuff. Okay, fine. We don't have to talk about why should we sell the middle school over there or some other topic, right? We're talking about this topic. And staying germane to that subject is sometimes hard, but you got to keep people on track, both commission members and the public. Debate issues, not personalities, right? Dave, you always vote no on these things, and I'm tired of it, right? No, right? You can't do that, right? You want to say, say what your view is on it. Don't attack other people's views on it, and don't attack personalities. As the chairperson, you should call person out of order for something like that and just say that, look, we're going to stop. You stop talking. We're not going to allow that. Talk about what the issue is. Don't attack personalities. And then again, kind of ending the debate, again, a chairman's role, keep this on track, move it along, let everybody have an opportunity to speak, but don't go crazy and spend all hours of the night doing it. Kind of you have to move the topic forward. Tom's spoken a little bit about this, and I think maintaining order at meetings is actually easier in today's day and age. You can shut somebody off with a push of a button, right? You click them off, you mute them, you black them out. If they're being disrespectful, or if there's Zoom bombing or things like that, you can just push the button and they're gone. Versus in a live meeting, you got a disruptive person, you got to call the cops. Sometimes you got to get them physically removed from the property. It's harder. It's a lot easier on Zoom, in my opinion. Things to remember as a chair. If you're new as a chairman, or even if you've been doing this for a while, you'll know there's constantly used procedures. You get the flow of it after a while. You know how to run a meeting. Make sure you know what's being debated and voted on. see that motions are clearly worded, expressed in the affirmative, and repeated regularly. The more, it's really important to repeat what it is we're voting on, what the motion is, and what people are debating. Make sure the effects of amendments are clear. Sometimes you have a lot of debate about what an amendment to a motion might be, and might not be clear as to what was actually voted on. So again, this is the motion. It's been amended to reflect this change, and this is what we're voting on. Learn how to conduct voting, know what the steps of the meeting are. Learn how to handle points of order. It's important to say, okay, we're going to stop talking about things for a moment and address Mr. Smith's point of order here. You know, it's well taken, right? And that's actually the way that the chairman addresses the point of order. That's a well taken point of order. We're gonna listen to that. Or that's not well taken. We don't need to go that way. Bottom line is, know as a chairman, know more about parliamentary procedure than everybody else on the dais, and you'll be in good stead. And you know, like I said, get one of these, or you know, keep this as a handy cheat sheet to help you along. Okay, we got 15 minutes. Tom's still here. I'm still here. And before we get out of
Just one point on what Rich said about controlling the meeting. In the FOI Act, should somebody be so disruptive, or some group of people be so disruptive on an in-person meeting, you have a right to clear the room and continue the meeting. There's an interesting phrase in there. It says, you can clear everybody from the room unless, including the, except for the media, unless the media is creating the disturbance. So it's sort of an interesting twist, but you know, if there's a group that's making it so impossible to conduct business, you have a right to clear the room.
I had a couple of, give you 1 second. I had a couple of cases over the years where individuals would want to come and videotape the proceeding. This was before actually all the Zoom stuff. Haven't seen so much of it since the Zoom stuff, so that's kind of a helpful silver lining there as well. But yeah, people do have the right to independently come and record. I've had people hire stenographers to get a transcript for themselves if it's a contentious, like a zoning matter where they want a transcript and know what was said and who voted what way. So people have the right to record the meetings in person. That becomes disruptive sometimes, but it's allowed.
But you have a right as a board. Let's again, this room in person, the cameras aren't working. Someone comes up and sticks a camera right where Rich is standing.
Right.
You have a right to move them away. You have a right, again, to conduct an orderly meeting.
Yep.
Yes, you can record, but the camera's got to be over here or back in, you know, so that you can do it without disruption.
Good, you had a question.
Is the quote "so moved" a legal motion?
I don't like, you know, because it's not always clear, like
No,
what
it isn't.
right, what you're voting on. So that's why I say repeat the motion. So, you know, you're debating buying the school bus. Yeah, I think we should buy the school bus. Okay, well, what color is it? You know, who are we gonna buy it from? How much are we gonna spend? Okay, all right. I think we should buy the school bus from DATCO for 500 grand. So moved, right? What are we voting on? Right? We just talked about 5 different things, right? I think we should buy it that way, but maybe you don't, maybe 5 other people don't. So somebody's got to actually formally make, I move, right, to do this. Somebody's got to second it. And then the chairman finally opens it up for debate. We're going to vote on it. Yes, no, there's a vote. And then the chairman should say, okay, the motion is as follows. This is what the motion says. Yes or no, you take the vote. It's a lot clearer. I don't like so moved, you know, because it's not clear. It doesn't create a good record. Put it that way. It's the attorney and me talking. Yes.
2 quick things. So if you want to have like a conversation with the group, not necessarily something that needs a direct motion, but like progress updates and something you're working on, and you put on just an agenda item like discussion on blank, that.
Yep,
We
you can have,
videos when we show something.
yep, you can have a discussion on topics without any, and you don't have to vote on everything.
And if you think that there might even be the sliver of a chance that you're going to talk about it, you can say action possible. It doesn't mean you have to vote.
Right.
So in other words, discussion on topic X, action possible, and then you're covered all the way around.
Yeah, so if you do vote on it, you're covered,
Right.
right?
And then the other question was, when you're debating, it has to go pro con. It can't go like pro con.
No, it doesn't, you don't always have to go one side or the other, you know, I've seen that, a lot of it's, you know, maybe everybody has warm fuzzy feelings about what it is you're debating, and everybody's in support, and everybody just wants to get out there and state their reasons why. That's okay, you know, it's kind of hard to gauge it sometimes, but if you know there's opposition, sometimes a chairman will say, okay, you know, I've heard from a couple people in favor. Is there anybody, you know, in opposition to the motion? You know, from the public or anybody on the dais in opposition to this? And give them, again, it's creating a clear record that you've given minority positions the opportunity to be heard and speak their piece. And go from there. There's no requirement, though, to go back and forth on each side, though.
What you just said, though, you said if you have a motion, the chair can ask the audience for an opposite position?
No, I was talking more about like a public hearing at a P and Z meeting. The audience doesn't have the right to really opine.
Right, that's why I was
Right.
kind of like, that's where you're going with that one.
Right.
And I'm gonna jump in on that
Yeah.
one too. Well, I've seen too many boards get into debates, conversations with people in the audience especially during public comment. They start asking questions. My strongest advice, now this is just sort of putting on my former board chair hat. Thank you for your comment. We'll write down the question. The chief, the superintendent, the town manager will get back to you on that. I find that the conversations back and forth with the audience, if you will, are not productive.
Your town council has two sections on the standard agenda for public remarks. One, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you reserve for like public remarks on items that are on the agenda for that evening. And then there's another section later on, public remarks for whatever you guys want to talk about, right? Just bring it to our attention, that type of thing. I don't know if that's the way you're handling it. I've seen that used in the past that way, but I don't know if that's what you're currently doing.
Not really, so, but the reason that was put on there, not necessarily know if I'm in favor, is after they heard our discussion about the items that are on the agenda, they might have a comment as to what we came out for an output.
Right.
That was kind of there because the complaint was, well, we say X, Y, and Z, but we don't really know what you're gonna say until you get into the debate of the item.
Right.
So then when they get to this, the back part of the comment saying, oh, I agree with you, or I don't like what you did. And
Yep.
type of.
Far back.
There's no requirement that you're aware of to have a second public comment section, is there?
Nope.
No, thank you.
There's no requirement that you have any,
Yeah, right.
It's
You don't
entirely
have
up to you.
public comment.
entirely, unless you've got something in your charter or your bylaws. Some towns have it that they must have it, but not under FOI or Robert's view.
So let's just say like planning, zoning, ZBA, or even the historical board. They want to walk on a property.
Site visits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that
The
handled?
nemesis of our.
You notice,
So,
you notice it as a meeting.
yeah, it's a
Meeting, and you
It's a
say,
meeting?
it's a meeting, yeah,
Mhm.
you notice it as a meeting. The Planning and Zoning Commission will walk property X at 6 o'clock on Tuesday.
With an agenda, the whole 9 yards.
That's correct.
Yep. We put an agenda out there that we're gonna have a site visit at the property at whatever, 6 AM, 7 AM. Maybe later. You should not discuss anything at the meeting, at the site visit. That's always been my advice. I don't think it's a FOIA law. It's more
No,
of a-
it's
more of
sound
It's
practice.
sound practice, not discussed amongst the commission members at the site visit, anything about the application. You're just there to observe the surroundings and familiarize yourself with the property that's the subject of the application. So don't discuss it. Don't have input from the applicant. Maybe just to guide you around a little bit, but no advocacy. And certainly no comment from the public. Now, the other question, I'll look to you on this, is the public entitled, right? To go
One of the-
walk on the site visit with
One of
commission?
that's a real problem
It's a problem,
sometimes,
yeah,
because the property owner doesn't want them on there.
right.
And my advice there is, look, you tell the property owner that under the law that they have the right to be there.
Mhm.
If you're going to stand firm on that, understand that we're probably not going to have a site walk and we'll make the decision with less information.
Yeah.
That's a difficult one. I'm not thrilled to give you the answer, but that's the answer
Yeah.
that the law would say.
FOIA would require with an open meeting, which a site visit is, the public's allowed to attend. Property owner doesn't want the public traipsing through their property, more often than not, right? There's liability issues, there's, there's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
so-
understood.
so. In
That,
today's day and age, site visits are kind of rare. I mean, and sometimes I know that the applicants want them, and maybe even the commission does, but between, you know, a good engineer, good videography, good GIS and satellite data, you can get a good view of property. You don't necessarily have to walk it. so
Rich,
much.
one of the suggestions I give when that happens, when there's that confrontation, is that perhaps the commission designate one person to make the site walk and go, then it's not a meeting, then the one person goes and then it makes a substantive report back to the rest of the board.
Could the commission visit it in groups of two?
In groups, they're
Small
not a
groups
quorum
that are not a
too.
quorum?
Yep, yep, that would be okay
Do it
too.
that way too.
Again, that, I would only recommend that if it's in a situation where the property owner is adamant.
But good.
Can you hold an executive session via Zoom, limited access?
You can have an executive session via Zoom,
Sure.
and you can have
Okay.
limited access to the people that you invite into the Zoom meeting. Yes,
So would you turn off the recording at that point?
I've seen some towns actually have a different link because you want to keep the initial meeting kind of open and kind of running, like, so if you were at a live meeting, the board would leave the room, typically go to another room, the public would sit here, wait. Board would come back after so you kind of do the same thing on Zoom, but you have a separate link and say, okay, the board members jump off onto the separate Zoom link. Now, sometimes technologically that might pose a problem. I don't know if you can do that.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the best way of handling it. Otherwise, you're gonna lose public. People aren't gonna come back on, or they're not gonna know that you came out of session because you have to reopen it via Zoom, and nobody's gonna know that you ever came back into session. You know, or what you did afterwards. So it's better, I think. First way. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a comment on that. Zoom also has a rooms feature that might allow that sort of breakout.
I think you're right. I've heard about that. I have not seen it in play yet, but I think you're right about that. Yeah. 5 minutes? Or you want to leave room? Dave's got questions.
I do. I have a series of them, but
Okay.
I'll just kind of hit some of the highlights. So let's talk about voting since we're on Zoom right now. I think the legislation sort of hung some information around voting in a Zoom setting. Does it require anything different when voting in a Zoom setting, when some of the membership is not in the room?
No,
Does it
just
require roll
the
calls or
the key
anything
is,
like
the key is so that everybody is clearly identified. I mean, you can do it via roll call or say, you know, or go around the room. The person has to identify him or herself. It's got to be clear that that person's casting the vote in that direction.
They had to be able to, this even predated Zoom. This was when we could still do conference calls
Right.
and audio call-ins.
And by the way,
Yeah.
that was in place before all of this
Right.
Zoom stuff. It's still in place. You're an in-person meeting and one of your members is on, you know, on a yacht in the Bahamas or something and wants to participate in the meeting. They can still do it virtually and it doesn't turn it into a virtual meeting.
They can call in.
That
They can-
call-in permission existed before, it existed afterwards.
And it doesn't have to be video. It can be a call-in.
It can be a call, it can be a
Yeah.
telephone.
It
Yeah,
can be a conference line. As long as they have the
But it
ability.
doesn't create a hybrid meeting under the new law.
no,
We're talking about commission members.
commission members only,
I
right?
understand that.
So we've had situations where commission member and someone say, hey, wait a minute, my friend wanted to call in too. Why can't they do it? That doesn't turn it into a hybrid meeting. If it's in person, it reverts back to what we had before March of 2020, which allowed commission members to call in.
Okay.
Do you have more, Dave? I have another question.
Sure. Let's talk quickly about revised minutes,
Uh-oh.
right?
Right.
So minutes are supposed to be posted
7
7
days,
days.
7 calendar days for regular meetings, 7 business days for a special.
Okay.
I didn't write it. Don't shoot the messenger.
I know, I understand. Fast forward to next month. One of the boards and commissions comes back together, fast forward 2 weeks, council comes back together and says, oh, wait, that's wrong. What do we do with the original set of minutes?
The original set of minutes is a public record. Our strongest recommendation on that is not to create a second set of minutes. The minutes are put in. 2 weeks later, the council meets and makes changes to them. This set of minutes reflects the changes in that set of minutes.
So what is the guidance in reality about making sure that set of minutes A is somehow identified as having been amended.
You do draft. Yeah, I mean,
You could put subject to approval in them when you put them in. What I recommend to folks is always look at the next set to make sure that they're not substantive changes. And that's the problem, and again, it's not, it doesn't make sense logically, but once that first set of minutes is in, it's a public record that you can't do anything with. So unless you want to create a second set of minutes, I always say, look, try to avoid that unless the changes are so substantive that they make the first set incomprehensible. And then you put the second set in. You just, and that's not in the FOIA Act, that's in records retention laws in Connecticut that say it's a public record, you can't destroy them.
Why do you vote on minutes at a meeting?
Well, you vote on them
to make sure
at
that
the next meeting to reflect which, so you read,
Changed until then.
you can't change them until the next set, right?
I've always thought the best practice is just to post them in the timely, pursuant to FOIA, but just say subject to approval or draft,
Right.
you know.
Draft gets tricky because of the draft exemption. So they're not exempt. You want to make sure people.
So I was trying to get to.
Yeah, subject to approval is a better.
We're always trying to find the exemption.
I know.
Lawyers.
I know.
No, but yeah, subject to approval, and then that way it's clear they're subject to approval, and at the next meeting, one of the agenda items is
Approval of
the
minutes.
And if there's any comments or changes, they'll be reflected there, and it's just a few sentences usually.
And just by the way, I know we're being recorded here, so I'm kind of going against what I just said. I mean, if it's a typo, if it's a
Yeah.
name, let's not get crazy. You just flip them out. It's the substantive changes that you want to
Mhm.
be careful of making to the first set.
You had another question?
Define a caucus?
A caucus is a group of the same political party.
Same board, same party is the
Same.
best way to do it. Again, as I said before, East Hampton's not very political, so you don't need to worry about that. But members of the same board and the same party can caucus and talk about a giant loophole in
Anything, you know about anything.
public meeting,
Yeah.
and really about anything. So I don't know, what's your council breakdown? How many of which party?
5-2.
All right, so the five, clearly the majority, clearly can do, have control, so they could go off, and sit forever and set everything up. And the other two are kind of left out in the cold. It's not good. I think we think that this is one of the things that they negotiated when they got to that unanimous vote. They said, okay, give us the caucus and we'll put this other stuff in.
So if I may, Matthew, unless it's on the same topic of caucus.
It's not.
Okay, so same body, same party. Any of our boards and commissions that have any breakdown, those bodies, those sub bodies can meet together. So if it's Republican, what about unaffiliated?
Okay. Unaffiliated are not, the way they wrote it is Rs and Ds, right?
Okay,
Now, if an unaffiliated is, out on an island and wants to caucus with one of those two, he or she can submit something to the town clerk and say, I'm going to caucus with the Ds. And that becomes his or her caucus position, doesn't change their affiliation, becomes their caucus position for the remainder of that term.
okay. So really, we're talking about parties, official parties.
Yeah.
Same body, same party.
Right.
That group, without notice, without an agenda, without really anything, can meet together at a time convenient to all of them and discuss their business.
Yep.
All right. Just-
Giant loophole. I don't want to tell you that
I had that on my list too,
It's
Alana, just to make sure that we were all. on
it's
the
a
same-
giant loophole, but yes,
Can you invite a guest to a caucus?
no,
No.
same board, same party only.
On the topic of subcommittees, because I know you mentioned that earlier. Sometimes if you're just trying to pull a couple people together to work on a project, so the full commission can look at something. What is the number of people that triggers, you need an agenda, you need to be record? minutes?
There is no number. There is no number, but here's what I suggest, that if it's something that you're just going to do a little research or something like that, don't name it a formal subcommittee. Say, can a couple of you go and look at that and bring it back to the full commission? Because once you designate it as a subcommittee, even if it's just two members, then you're under the umbrella of FOI. And sometimes that becomes a little unwieldy, to be honest.
On your subcommittees, do you have to have minority representation?
Not under FOI.
Not- Not under law either, just subcommittees are subcommittees. They don't have to. Minority representation is on the voting body. Subcommittees don't vote. They populate information back up to the committee and then the committee votes. So that's where the minority representation laws kick in.
Oh, yes. Parting gifts.
Parting gifts. Tom has,
While we're doing that, one last thing,
Yes.
any timeline requirement for cancellation in front of a meeting?
You know, interestingly enough, they move heaven and earth for notice, cancellation, no. Believe it or not. So
Yep, just confirm.
walking in the door.
the Freedom of Information American Express card. Don't leave home without it. These are highlights of the FOI Act. Very small print, but we're a very small agency. These are really good for a purse, a wallet, a desk drawer, something to look at on the fly. And on the back is our name, our address, our phone number. Don't ever hesitate to pick up the phone and call. A lot of people say, gee, I felt bad calling. It's a stupid question. This law can be really difficult, especially for volunteers and people who do it, sort of part-time. So never hesitate to call. I'll try to get you an answer. Again, as I said before, you can say, yeah, well, that's what he said, but you can at least have a basis upon which to make a decision.
Your cell phone's on there?
Cell phone, no, that's not on there, but the phone number's on there. And by the way, I always recommend calling the main number. I am on the phone so much that you do, but if you get voicemail, I will call you back, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will attest that Tom is very responsive.
So I'll leave these
A
here.
wealth of information.
Help yourselves, please.
In terms of resources, if any of you wants one of these, in the next week or so, let Kathy in the town manager's office know, we'll get them for you. Okay, if anybody wants one of these, I know it's a fun read. We'll provide it to you, okay? It is a page turner. You're ready.
Thank you, guys.
Anything else? Thank you all very much, appreciate it.
Thank you.